really humbled. By way of introduction, I wondered if our assembled guests could maybe introduce themselves and tell us about the role they had on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Okay, I'm Alan Danziger, aka Chainsaw Jerry, and I played Jerry the van driver in the original and still the best Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which was filmed in 1973 but came out in 1974, October the 11th. And here, this past Friday, it was proclaimed by the mayor Texas Chainsaw Massacre Day in Austin, Texas, and it was a great event. And there was wall-to-wall media coverage, and some of the still living cast members that are not in diapers or drooling were there with me. So we had a great time.
Perfect introduction. Thank you for that. And lovely to see Pride of Place. You got your Cine-Excess Lifetime Achievement Award already there. And we thank you for that, that sort of bit of cross promotion there. Next on my screen, Bill, it's a pleasure to welcome you. If you could just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the role you had in the movie.
Sure. My name is William Vail, and I played the part of Kirk, the first poor lamb to go into the house to go to slaughter. It was 50 years ago. They tell me, I don't believe it. Unfortunately, I was not able to join Alan on the steps of City Hall because I am one of the ones in diapers, so I wasn't able to make Alan. What else can I say? That's the beginning.
Well, we'll get back to more of what you want to say shortly, but thank you for that. And again, a pleasure to host you. I'm moving on to the third guest we have on my screen. It's a pleasure to introduce Ted. Same question, if you could just briefly introduce yourself and say a little bit about what you did on the film.
Hey, thanks, Xavier, and thanks for having us today. I'm Ted Nicolaou. My job on Texas Chainsaw Massacre was the location sound recordist, which basically means I was responsible to make sure that all the dialogue was cleanly recorded and all of the chainsaw effects and screaming was recorded without being too distorted, which was quite a job on that film.
Thank you for that. Now we're going to get into the sort of detail of what you all did. A general question for all of you to get us going. Now, the interesting thing about all of you, I think, Bill, the closest Austin connection is you, San Antonio. All of your other colleagues effectively came in to Austin in the 1970s. So it makes for a really interesting set of reflections. So I wondered, starting maybe with Alan, and the same question will be to all of you. Just briefly, Alan, how did you get involved with this kind of very influential production, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre?
Well, I came to Austin from a small Texas town in the Bronx, New York, in 1964 to go to graduate school. And then I was working on a master's degree in social work. And in that regard, I met Toby Hooper, and he was doing a movie called Eggshells, which is what I call a psychedelic hippy-dippy kind of movie. And because I knew David and Amy, they were volunteers in my program, they asked to film a scene at my house. And from that arose other scenes and whatnot. So because I was in Eggshells, that's how I got involved in Chainsaw. When the Eggshells came out, virtually nobody saw that movie. And then about 4 years later, they wrote Chainsaw, and they called me and said, we want you to play the role of Jerry. I wasn't an actor, as some of the reviews have said many times. In fact, one guy referred to me as this 30-year-old disco stew looking dude. So I didn't know what that meant, but it was a Simpson reference, and that's how it happened.
Wonderful. Same question to you, Bill. You were already there in San Antonio. How did you get involved in the production?
Well, that's a little bit of misinformation. I was born in San Antonio because my father had been wounded in Korea, and they had sent him there to recover. And then my mother found out and flew back from Japan to have me. But once I was born, being an Army brat, I moved all over the world, and did not come back to Texas until I went to the University of Texas to study theater. And there I studied acting for a while. Then I got more interested in directing and I started studying that. But all the time doing projects with the RTF department because I've always loved film and film acting and all of the whole process. So one day I passed the call board and I saw, I think, a 3x5 card that said, "We're looking for actors for this film that's going to be shot in Austin, Texas. If you're at all interested, call the number below and set up an interview, an appointment," which I did. And eventually I met up with, with Toby, but also the writer of the film. And we sat down and I interviewed, and a few weeks went by, I guess. And then they called me up and said, "You got the part. Come on down." That's how it happened.
Perfect.
And the rest, they say, is history.
The rest, they say, is history. Ted, over to you.
For me, I came to Austin in 1967, started in a plan called Plan 2 on a kind of pre-med track. And in some classes there was also a guy named Daniel Pearl. And Daniel and I were kind of gravitated to each other because in those days you could pretty much tell who were the kind of hippie type people and who were the more square people. And so Daniel and I became really fast friends. And about the same time, we both kind of went, let's screw this pre-med, and became really fascinated by filmmaking. And both of us kind of jumped over to the film department. And in the film department, there was a guy named Courtney Gooden, who was kind of like the greatest sound man and sound engineer. And I boom operated for him on some shorts and little public service things that we did and some student films. And when it came time for Chainsaw Massacre, Courtney was off in San Antonio shooting a movie. And so me as his boom man was sort of like the next choice of a good sound recordist in Austin. And Daniel, by that time, had already joined on to the film. And I believe he recommended me, and that's how I ended up there.
But turning to Alan and Bill, it's also is a film that has a myths around its low budget indie status and the kind of freedoms that it offered you as performers to create the roles. So I just wondered if you've got any brief comments on, how much freedom you were given with these roles and reflections on that. If I turn to Alan first with that question, Alan, your thoughts, please.
Yes, I think we were given quite a bit of freedom in that most of the lines or the funny lines in the movie that I have are really my own lines. The line like, "Hey guys, quit goofing on me," or when I go into the gas station, I ask if place has room service. So they gave me a lot of latitude. Basically, they said, "Alan, just be you." And in this case, it worked quite well.
That's a perfect answer. Bill, anything you would like to add to that? Did you find the same set of freedoms?
Yes, but I didn't enjoy it. I came from, like I said, a theater background where you would have a script by, one of the classics authors, and then that was gave you the information that you needed from Tennessee Williams or Shakespeare, Ionesco, whoever. And I showed up, and I had always worked very closely with directors doing theater and always counted on them to have the overall vision of what we were doing. And if there was a question, whether I should turn right or left or cry or sit or whatever, I would go to them and we would talk about it and come to a mutual understanding that helped develop the story and tell the story. And so I was used to those kind of relationships. And when I went to Toby first time with questions, all he said was, just go be yourself. And I went, beg your pardon? Just go be yourself. And I went, well, that's not why I became an actor, to be myself. I want to explore other ways of being, other, temperaments, other thinking. And so I kind of felt like let down at the time. And so it was up to me to figure out where my place in the van was, Jerry was the funny guy, and then the two beautiful ladies there. And then Franklin was the fat kid with the sausage in his mouth. And then what was my relationship and how did I fit in? So anyway, it took me a little while to come up with what I ended up doing. But and then still I would go back to Toby and ask him the same question, and he always gave me the same answer. So for better or for worse, I thought about if things had been different, but then it would be a different movie and maybe we wouldn't even be here talking about it today. So
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, sticking with you, if I could, Bill, let's drill down on things that you probably liked even less, for want of a better word, which was just the kind of grueling production schedule, which has become a myth in itself. People who said lasting up to 16 hours a day. Daniel Pearl previously told us it lasted a lot longer. 16 was a good day. Your thoughts and reflections on just how, how it was in terms of shooting this kind of very, very low budget, intense film.
Well, that's why it was shot the way it was. It was low budget and we didn't have a lot of time. So from my perspective, it was like one, maybe two takes most days when we were in the van. It was extremely hot, as you can imagine, Texas in the summertime. You're in a van with the windows rolled up because Ted insisted it be that way. And then we just rode around in the Texas sun all day long. And it was not only the actors that you see, but then there was Ted and Daniel and Toby and sometimes Lou Perryman, and in the back of the van. So that's a lot of bodies, a lot of body heat, and a lot of smelliness.
Style of the movie, into the symbolism and the interpretation. And Bill, I wanted to sort of come back to you, if I could, for a minute, just around the imagery of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, particularly the imagery of rural communities, because there seems to be a marked shift in the 1970s. Up until the 1970s, rural representations seem to be quite comedic, and then you have movies like Deliverance, you have Texas Chainsaw, so you get a sense of the 1970s really recasting rural communities as monstrous. I just wanted to get your thoughts and reflections on why, the 1970s was such a dramatic shift in these images.
Well, to me, I mean, I'm not a professor of this topic, but it just seemed like Ted mentioned before that there was a Y in the road. And all of a sudden, there were the people for the war going down one road, and the people against the war were on another road. And it just happened to be that, the more hippie, liberal types, pot smoking kids were against the war. And I think all of a sudden that created a marked difference when they were making movies, that the guys that were for the war usually, or a lot of times, portrayed as, rednecks from the country, were the bad guys. And and then that just, like you said, Deliverance and a number of other movies expanded on that and kept reinforcing that image again and again.
I mean, before I leave you, it's interesting. I know you've often reflected on whether, is there another side to this? So you've got the rural communities, and then you've got almost like the invading youngsters. I use the term invading knowingly there. I mean, do you see any other possible interpretations of the moralities of this movie?
Well, lately, and this was not at the time the movie was made, but just from our conversations and just a lot more thinking about it, and thinking about it in today's term as the others that were so much is in the politics, is in the news at the moment. And the other is seen as the bad guys, the evils, the cat and dog eaters of the world, right? It just seemed to me that from a different perspective, you could see where the young kids, they're the ones who go in the house, who break in the house. Somebody breaks in my house, I'm going to shoot them. I'm not going to have any qualms about that. I might not eat them, but I certainly am going to protect my family and protect myself. And basically, that's what Leatherface does, you know? And so it makes you think, who is the bad guy here? Who are the invaders? Who are the evil ones? Who are the other?
A question just to Ted, my penultimate question, it is moving away from the rural to something else that seems to be quite marked in Texas Chainsaw. And, there's no right or wrong here, Ted, but I'm just interested in the theme of monstrous families, okay, which, is there always in American cinema, but really sort of fuel injected by Texas Chainsaw. And you seem to get that a lot in 1970s horror. I just wondered if you had any thoughts on this and why it became such a prominent theme.
I think family is like one of the most universal experiences of humanity. And all of us have like differences with members of our family. If you're normal and if you're like super lucky, you're like really close to your parents. But back in those days, like I said earlier, there was a gigantic split and parents were like completely didn't know what to do with their children who seemed to be going crazy and taking drugs. But what the kids were doing was discovering kind of a new way of seeing the world and a new sense of empathy for everything in the world. Monstrous families, I guess the Chainsaw Massacre is probably the most kind of horrific domestic comedy that ever existed, with the kind of the closeness and the family ties between the whole Chainsaw Massacre family and the concern for the door, over like the bodies of people in the freezer. I think that, I can't imagine very many other American horror films that kind of captured the insanity, the potential of a family. I think Chainsaw Massacre, for me, inspired more the kind of combination of monster movie and psycho killer movie with a killer that wore a mask that turned him into a monster. It was like Frankenstein with a chainsaw.
Final question to you all is reflecting on Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's obviously inspired sequels, remakes, prequels, even video games. So, I mean, how do you see the film's contribution to cinema and culture? Alan, I'll start with you.
Wow, it's amazing. I think the fact that this movie was almost like a documentary, the way that it was shot. It's a sweltering day in August. We're all sweating. I mean, you could just see it. None of us, I guess, I wasn't an actor. And so I think there was a believability about it. And and it also took place in Texas. And you could believe that what happened did take place in Texas. So it was just all that believability in the earthiness and just the grittiness of that movie is still 50 years later, and it's right now it seems to be blowing up. You know, we're getting all these accolades, and I met Patton Oswalt in LA, and he was a big fan of it. And so it's an exciting time. And this movie turned out to be something that I don't think any of us had any idea would become what it has become.
Lovely answer. Bill, same question to you. Its contribution to cinema and culture.
Well, I think, well, obviously it helped Austin movie scene a lot. You know, it was the grandfather of everything else that's come along after it. Boy, that's a hard question because, you know, I just don't look at it that way. You know? We're all so surprised that, you know, it's still this popular 50 years later. Thrilled, believe me. We have absolutely the best fans in the world. But why? I think just because, you know, it has that mixture of horror and comedy. It's about the family. It's about the other. Who is the other? It's a classic. It's I think I mentioned to you. You know, it was created from Hansel and Gretel. Was just the beginning seed of an idea when they were thinking about writing this script. So it has a lot of fairy tale elements to it. Fairy tale on its head, maybe, but so it has a classic nature to it. And those things just, they exist. They will exist forever. You know, good stories. And I wanted to say one time I've, at one of the conventions I've been to, a guy came up to me and went, you know, where did you find that family to be in your movie? And I went, beg your pardon? He went, yeah, the guys in the house. Where did you find them and find them willing to be in your movie? And I went, oh, well, Texas, you know, come to Texas sometime. They're all over the place. Anyway.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Finally, Ted, same question. I mean, you went on to be a filmmaker in your own right. So your reflections, this film's contribution to cinema and culture.
I think Texas Chainsaw Massacre set a nearly impossible bar for horror filmmakers that came after. It was like the perfect coming together of elements of a director who was a true Texas original strange person, a screenplay that was a nightmare from not quite the beginning, but to the end was this unrelenting nightmare. Film students who kind of contributed to the movie, Daniel Pearl's cinematography. Bob Burns wasn't a film student anymore, but we all kind of approached the film as if it were the most important thing in the world at the time that we were making it. A cast that was like from the theater and not really cinema actors. And so they gave the film a sense of reality, a family of horror characters that are unparalleled. I don't think even the later iterations of Chainsaw Massacre were able to kind of capture the magic of that film, and locations that reeked of the actual kind of mental state of the movie. So for me, that film is like almost impossible to ever achieve something like that again.